Good morning, everyone. You're very welcome to the first of the three-part series of webinars aimed at businesses based in Ireland that we'll deliver between now and the end of the year. To introduce myself, my name is Shane O'Hanlon and I'm the Funding for Growth Manager with InterTradeIreland. This morning's event kicks off Phase 3 of our funding advisory service for established SMEs. The aim of these workshops is to assist established SMEs who are looking for new alternative sources of funding. The programme evolved from research that highlighted that whilst there was a lot of support in place for startup businesses seeking finance, there was less support available for established businesses. The report also demonstrated that established businesses tended not to be aware of the full range of funding options available to them. So when we started planning Phase 3, we envisaged physical workshops right across the island. Like everyone else, we've had to adapt to the current circumstances. Therefore, for the remainder of the year, we will provide these sessions in this type of format. So I'm pleased to say for Phase 3, we've got Grant Thornton back on board, who will continue to work with us to deliver this programme for the next number of years. It's great that they are able to bring their considerable experience and expertise to the table. But before I hand you over to Michael Neary from Grant Thornton, I want to bring to your attention some of the supports InterTradeIreland are delivering. Firstly, eMERGE. eMERGE makes a real difference by providing €2,800 fully funded consultancy support to help companies in manufacturing and tradable services improve their online sales and marketing and identify opportunities for e-commerce. Project plans have included strategic advice on design templates for mail campaigns and website design, search engine optimization work, help to set up Google Ads campaigns, advice, guidance and training on best practice with social media. We've also seen the delivery of reports outlining the cross-border e-commerce strategy for your brand and the development of a digital content strategy and plan that will drive sales, extend brand awareness and build on brand loyalty. So we've already seen some great success stories come out of the work that the guys in InterTradeIreland through eMERGE have delivered. You know, I can think of a company that has secured a contract worth nearly £1 million from a contact made via an eMERGE supported e-marketing campaign. We also have numerous examples of manufacturing companies generating direct sales online for the first time. So eMERGE is making a real difference and I would encourage you to get onto our website and take a look at it. Secondly, emergency business solutions. EBS provides professional advice fully funded to the value of €2,250 for cross-border companies in manufacturing and tradable services to address key business challenges related to COVID-19. So support that we have provided includes guidance and direction to government supports and help in applying for these where feasible, completion of lending applications for loan supports, guidance and direction with regards to cash flow and the impact on your supply chain, legal issues including employment and redundancy advice, as well as advice on contracts and leases. Support to help businesses diversify to offer other products and services. We've also seen a number of examples of people looking at health and safety assessments, business risk assessments. And we've also started to see people seeking support to allow them to rapidly reposition their business strategy. So there's a lot of good work going on and I would really encourage you to take a look at these. So that's enough from me. I'll now hand you over to Michael from Grant Thornton. Thanks, folks, and enjoy.
Thanks, Shane, and good morning, everybody, and you're very welcome to the webinar this morning. My name is Michael Neary. I'm Corporate Finance Partner at Grant Thornton. I'm going to be joined today by my colleague Emer Joyce, who's going to talk about the wage scheme, and that's going to be the second part of the agenda. The third part of the agenda, we will have a panel discussion with Nick Ashmore, the Chief Executive of the SBCI, and Donncha Cullinan from Enterprise Ireland. And then I'm going to talk about the banking environment with Michael Lahoff and Gareth Stokes from the Microfinance Ireland, and Michael Lahoff, Head of Business Banking in Bank of Ireland. And then Finally, we will have Gary Stokes from InterTradeIreland just focusing on some of the supports from Intertrade. And then we'll have a Q&A session, and I'd ask you all to participate in the session and get the most out of it, and to ask questions. We are going to have a poll during the course of the morning as well, and we'll ask you some questions that you come in on the poll. But please feel free to ask questions on the Q&A session. So to kick off, I'm going to look at the economic outlook, and some of the challenges, and some of the summary supports that we have. Just to say at the outset, we are going to supply the slides that we have this morning, and they're going to be sent to everybody. So the objective of the slides is to give you a good understanding of the level of government supports that are available, and also so that you can research in further detail if you'd like to. So just moving along there, Aisling. Let's chat about the economic, some of the economic context. I mean, COVID-19 has significantly affected all aspects of the economy. It's had a sharp effect. It's had a big effect on both unemployment and the recession that was mentioned yesterday, and the second quarter of decrease in the state's finances. So that's well mooted, and the challenges that businesses are going through at the moment are well versed. And I suppose some of the points that we are seeing, we're seeing that like finance and liquidity are key for businesses. Businesses are, you know, reassessing their cost base. They're looking at their supply chains. They're looking at managing their workforce, availing of government schemes, and looking at their strategy, moving online, and their brand strategy. There's challenges for businesses, and COVID-19 is one, but Brexit as well is around the corner. You know, hopefully there are positives and there are opportunities for businesses in Brexit, and we are seeing businesses being generally resilient. We are seeing that there is a reboot as businesses are getting back to work and getting back to get to action. But there are opportunities coming out of the COVID-19 situation. So if we move along to the some of the key government supports. They can be broken up into groups: the Enterprise Ireland supports, the ISIF 2 billion fund, and the SBCI supports that are available. And then from a smaller business perspective, there's the local enterprise offices and the microfinance supports as well. And Intertrade also have a range of supports that they will be outlining towards the end of the presentation today. So just moving along, Aisling, we're going to just talking about Enterprise Ireland. I want to focus on just the sustaining enterprise fund of 180 million that are available to Enterprise Ireland to distribute, and we're going to touch on each of the aspects of the supports now in a moment in a little bit more detail. But that's an interesting fund. It is a fund that's available up to the end of December, and Enterprise Ireland are very focused on achieving that goal. So that's something for business to be very aware of. So just moving along, we'll touch on a few in a little bit more detail. The business planning grant has been available since almost the start of the COVID crisis. The objective here is to bring a new set of financial eyes to a company, prepare cash flows, prepare a business plan for SMEs generally to get a clean and a new set of eyes on their finances, and to give them some guidance on moving forward. It's been widely worked through, and again, I know Enterprise Ireland are keen for anybody who is interested in availing of the business planning grant to avail of it, because the deadline is completion by the end of or by the mid-December this year, and that's a 5,000 grant. to get a consultant on board. So that's definitely one, if you're not aware of it, to do some more research on. Just moving along then, the business continuity voucher again. This is an opportunity to have a consultant review your business, to work with you on reducing costs and management. It's a $2,500 package. Again, something to consider if you haven't considered it, if you're available. And there's a wide range of eligibility for this, so that's definitely one to think about. Just moving along, Amy, to the next one. As businesses have rebooted, online has become more and more important. This grant has been widely used by businesses to get more up to speed on online and trading online. So it's definitely a one, if it's relevant for your business, to investigate further. Just onto the next, we have the SEF, and the SEF is a fund of over 180 million, and it will be divided into a minimum amount of 100,000, but up to 800,000 per enterprise. Enterprise Ireland have recently approved that there will be 50% of this non-repayable, and that's capped up to 200,000. So a non-repayable element of up to 200,000, and the balance amount being like a repayable advance, or either equity or a loan note. Again, this is widely available, and but the applications need to come through. This webinar is very timely, because the last quarter of the year is going to be key for Enterprise Ireland pushing through that requirement. So the next one we have is the Sustaining Enterprise Fund for smaller businesses, and for businesses of turnover up to 1.5 million, 25,000, and 50 between 1.5 and 5 million. So for the smaller side of established businesses, there's an opportunity there. The ISIF fund is a 2 billion fund that ISIF are managing, and that is focused on the medium and large size businesses in the economy. And I understand that reviews and work are underway on investing and pushing that money out into the economy. So Ashley, you might just move forward a couple of slides now. We're onto the SBCI supports. Just one more. Yeah, so the SBCI supports the COVID-19 working capital loan and the future growth loan have been available very close to the start of the COVID crisis. They've been widely availed of. I'll go in and then we'll talk some more now about the credit guarantee scheme, which was announced and launched yesterday, which is a very interesting government support for SMEs. So Ashley, maybe just move on to the next. So the COVID-19 working capital loan. This is a 1 to 3 year loan. It's specifically for working capital requirements. It's up to 1.5 million for businesses with an unsecured element up to 500,000. It's been widely used, and it's availed of by getting the application form and eligibility through the SBCI website, and then using the on-lenders, principally the banks, to work through the loan application. So that's a working capital piece. The next piece is the future growth loan scheme. So Ashley, maybe just moving along there. So this is for longer term investments. Again, this is a great incentive for businesses that have got wider interests. So again, this is up to 7 to 10 years. So that's one for investment in machinery and plant. The COVID-19 guarantee scheme was announced by Minister McGrath yesterday, and this will be a scheme of 2 billion available to businesses. They'll be where the government will give 80% of a guarantee on lending to SMEs. And the unsecured amount will be up to 250,000. So again, this is going to be a great opportunity for SMEs if they are considering taking on debt over the coming months. So Amy, just moving along, and I'm going to touch very lightly on the next slide, Aisling. So just maybe moving along, we've got the supports on the LEO, which are the local enterprise offices, and there are a series of supports that are being issued through the local enterprise offices, and for smaller businesses, there are a number of schemes that warrant a good review. We will be talking to Gareth Stokes, the CEO of Microfinance Ireland, about their offering to the market, and we'll do that very shortly. So just moving along, I'm not going to dwell on the continuity voucher, but again, that's through the local enterprise office. The microfinance scheme, which is the next slide, Aisling. I'm not going to dwell on the online voucher. Again, that's available through the local enterprise offices. Maybe on to the next slide, which is the Microfinance Ireland. Microfinance Ireland have got an extension in their remit, and they have loans from between 5 to 25,000 for businesses of up to 2 million of turnover, and they have an ability to increase that for existing customers, as I understand it, up to 50,000. The terms are up to 3 years, and there's no repayments and no interest for the first 6 months. So that's certainly one to consider. I'm going to just touch very briefly on the next slide, which is the Restart Grant Plus, and that's available through local authorities. I'm not going to dwell on that, but that's another government support that's out there. And then just finally, the cross-border companies schemes that InterTradeIreland have and focus on, and Gary Stokes is going to just touch on those a little bit more later on in the presentation. So I'm going to hand over to Emer now, who will focus on the wage subsidy scheme and a summary of activity there. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. So I think there's been a lot of media coverage at this stage on the initial wage subsidy scheme that was brought in March, and it has run out now at the end of August. So there was a little bit of overlap between the EWSS, the Employment Wage Subsidy Scheme, from its introduction on the 1st of July until the 31st of August when the TWSS scheme ran out. So I suppose revenue at this stage are winding up on the TWSS pieces, and they're now looking at the EWSS as the new scheme. So I'm just going to take you through some of the key points on that scheme, if I may. So firstly, just in terms of the overview of the scheme is to run from the 1st of September to the 31st of March 2021. Now, as I mentioned, it was introduced from the 1st of July. But where you had employees that didn't qualify for the TWSS, they could be included in that cohort from 1 July to 31 August. So it's effectively a sweep-back mechanism for the July and August period, which revenue are now processing and will be paying out on shortly. In terms of registration, there was a separate registration process for the EWSS, separate to the TWSS, so there wasn't a carryover of your registration from one to the other. So the key difference with this subsidy scheme is that it pays a flat rate subsidy to employers as against the TWSS, which was linked to the employee's net wage for January and February 2020. So in essence, what this scheme will be doing is the employer will pay the employees their contracted wages as normal. They'll tax it in real time as normal, and then the subsidy will be paid to the employer from revenue once the payrolls have been filed. One thing to note that when you're filing your payrolls, you will have a 0.5% rate of employers' PRSI available. However, in processing the payroll, the higher rate of PRSI will be levied with the refund being issued through revenue directly. Again, like the TWSS, it's administered on a self-assessment basis. So in registering for the scheme and indeed in claiming the subsidies, you're doing it on a self-assessment basis. Revenue are not in a position to confirm that that will be the case. And again, because it is a form of state aid, there will be a list of the employers who availed of the EWSS published on Revenue's website in January and April 2021. So just moving on to the next slide, just going to look briefly now at the eligibility criteria to qualify for the scheme. So I suppose that the first thing is that you have to have a valid tax clearance certificate. So again, any employers intending to go into the scheme need to have that certificate in place, and this can be requested on ROS. And it's a fairly instantaneous issuing once all the criteria are satisfied. Second, you need to be in a position to confirm that you will suffer a 30% reduction in either turnover or customer orders in the 6-month period from 1 July to 31st of December 2020. And that is compared by the benchmark period, which I've mentioned below. So for business in existence prior to 1 July 19, it's for the same 6-month period in 19, where you commence between 1 July and November 19. It's the date of commencement to 31 December 19. And for businesses commencing after 1 November, you compare it to your projected turnover or customer orders for that 6-month period, 1 July to 31 December 20. And I suppose in terms of disruption to the business, it must be as a result of COVID. It can't be a case that a business was in decline prior to COVID and can avail of this as an add-on. So just moving on briefly, just a couple of other points to note in regards to employer eligibility. Just the childcare sector was obviously one sector that was quite badly hit by COVID. There's no requirement for them to meet the 30% reduction in turnover. Turnover for the purposes of looking at the 30% test reduction includes all sources of trade, so all sources of sales, any donations you may receive, and any forms of state funding, with the exception of the wage subsidy scheme. So grants, etc., would need to be included here. There's no issue regarding cash reserves or an inability to pay normal outputs, which had been a feature of the older scheme. And again, Revenue will expect all businesses, as is normal with Revenue, to retain paperwork supporting the base on which you enter the scheme, and to ensure that you have a sufficient criteria available once you exit the scheme for Revenue in the event of a review. And a further point is, if it becomes evident to an employer, say for example in October, that on the 6-month period on a cumulative basis they're not going to be down 30% turnover, they should exit the scheme from the 1st of the following month, so in that case from the 1st of November. And again, it's incumbent on the employers that they do that at the end of each calendar month. So if we just moved on briefly, then if we look at an employee that's eligible for the purposes of the scheme, in effect any employee who's on your payroll and in receipt of gross wages during the period of the scheme, which starts, as I mentioned, from 1 July 2020 to 31 March 21, can be included. Certain proprietary directors can also be included, and there was additional Revenue guidelines issued on that last week. Certain connected parties cannot be included. So again, there's specific inclusions in those. And there has been some Revenue safeguards put in place to prevent abuse in terms of some anti-avoidance provisions. So we'll just look at the next slide, please. So in terms of the rates of subsidy, so as I mentioned, it is based on a flat rate subsidy. So where an employee earns less than €151.50 gross or more than €1,462 gross per week, there will be no subsidy available. However, for employees earning a gross weekly wage of between €151.50 and €202.99, the subsidy available to the employer will be €151.50. And where the gross wage paid by the employee is from €203 per week to €1,462 per week, the subsidy available is €203. So just finally, if we look at the next slide. Just a couple of important points to note on the subsidy. In terms of the treatment of the subsidy received by the employer, it is going to be taxed as part of their normal trading income. So again, in line with any government grants, it has to be brought into your P&L in normal time. The subsidy payments, as I mentioned, do not form part of your turnover for the 30% reduction test. So that is just to be borne in mind. And you look at the entity as a whole in the first instance, and if the entity as a whole is not down 30%, you then can look at a formal business division where the business is segregated into formal business divisions, and they were clearly defined prior to COVID-19. If it's a thing that for a business that either looking at turnover or orders is not representative of the form of the business, you can look at other reasonable bases. So for example, businesses that may be in a startup phase, etc. So you could, as long as the basis is reasonable, revenue will approve it. In those instances, revenue do ask that the employer would approach their local district directly prior to availing of the scheme. So that's the end of just a very whistle stop through the EWSS. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emer. I appreciate that. Okay, we're just going to go to the poll questions now. So let's get this part. So we'll just ask you to answer each of the questions that come up. And we're going to look at the results of these very shortly, just in advance of our panel discussions. Okay, so the next one is, have you received support via government COVID-19 loan scheme? Okay, so if yes, what aspect is presented as the biggest challenge? Okay, so interesting results there. I think we have one final one. Are you planning to apply for a new or increased support via a government COVID-19 loan scheme? Okay. That's very interesting. Okay. Oh, we have another one. What aspects will you be concerned with? So 52% are interested in taking on a government loan scheme. And getting funder approval being the most concern. Okay. Okay, I think that is the poll completed now. So Aisling, if you just wanted to move on to the next slide. Now, I'm going to ask Nick Ashmore, the CEO of the SBCI, and Donncha Cullinan from Enterprise Ireland, just to join us on the first panel discussion. Good morning to you both, and maybe I might ask Nick to start off, and maybe Nick, you might give us your observations just on the market at the moment, please.
Morning, Michael. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me on today. I suppose the SBCI has been actively focused on bringing credit supports to the market, and that's to reflect the fact that it's a much more difficult environment to look forward in terms of how businesses are going to perform and how they're going to plan their finances, which makes it harder to underwrite lending, and therefore there's a need for credit support. And we are seeing that. We've had the COVID working capital scheme in the market since March, offering loans of up to 3 years. And we've seen over 100 million of sanctioned lending across the banks in that scheme. We've seen strong demand for over 3,000 businesses looking for eligibility codes. But we're not seeing necessarily all of the eligibility code applications translate into loan drawdowns. So I think there's still a degree of uncertainty amongst businesses about their need for finance and exactly what type of finance they should avail of. We've also seen over 66 million of long-term loans drawn down or sanctioned under the Future Growth Loan Scheme, which resumed activity in between kind of May and July, and then has been fully active through August since we added an additional 500 million of capacity to that scheme. And we're also conscious that the large 2 billion credit guarantee scheme, which is now the medium-term product that's there, has been well flagged. So there may be a number of businesses that have been waiting to avail of that scheme, which offers loans for up to about 5.5 years, with also flexibility to cover refinancing of debt that's arisen due to the COVID situation as well. So we're now in a position where I think as businesses are coming out of the summer and starting to seriously look at resumption or expansion of activity again, we now have a suite of supports with short-term loans in the COVID working capital scheme, medium-term loans in the COVID credit guarantee scheme, and then longer-term loans of 7 to 10 years in the Future Growth Loan Scheme. And it's clear that businesses are getting on with it, but there's still very much sector division as well, with some sectors recovering and able to operate reasonably normally, but other sectors really still stuck in the sand with tourism and hospitality and the challenges that they're all facing. So all those challenges bring the need for additional financing in one form or another, whether that's from their own resources or bank credit or grant funding, and Donica could talk a lot about the different grant funding options that are there as well. So it's a very difficult situation to understand fully, and we're trying to parse the metrics that we're seeing coming through. But there's clearly a resumption amongst a good number of businesses. It's just not an across-the-board return to activity that we would hope for at this stage.
Thanks, Nick. Donica, maybe just from Enterprise Ireland's perspective, do you want to maybe just have maybe give some observations on the market?
Yeah, and again, our experience with our client base reiterates a lot of what Nick is saying, and I think a lot of what Michael and Gareth will talk about later on. There's a mixed resumption. I think I think COVID really hit everyone really hard in March, just in terms of trying to figure out what was going on with their business, what was actually going to change, what wasn't going to change. Once the initial kind of impact was there, people began to look at their businesses and try and figure out. I think most businesses just knuckled down and said, you know what, we're just going to survive this. We're just going to get through the initial bit. The wage subsidy scheme has undoubtedly given people room to kind of consider. And as Nick was saying, we're beginning to see an emergence of, as the summer closes, businesses are getting back. Some of the huge number of unknowns have resolved, not all of them, but businesses are now beginning to get back into it. And again, sectorally, we've seen our hospitality, entertainment, travel tech, some of our education services being really, really hit hard, and it still looks as if they're going to be really hit hard. But then a lot of other businesses are actually doing well, and actually looking at what do we do going forward, how do we figure out what our plans should be, how do we figure out what our funding should be. So the questions that were in the poll were very much around COVID loan. There's now a full suite of tools on the table from the government. So the July stimulus was, and I think maybe it's an Irish thing as well, for people to say, well, that's what's there now. Let's see what's coming down the line, and it might be better than what we have now. So I think that the clear message is we have what we have. July stimulus was a real stake in the ground to say these are the tools that are going to be at all of our disposals, and we work really closely with the SBCI and the banks in all of our product sets. It's not a question of one or the other. And when we are looking at a sustaining enterprise fund, we are trying to say, well, have you maximized the credit that you could get from the bank, and have you maximized the SBCI either future growth loan scheme or the COVID loan scheme, or your own funders or your own equity providers? Because what we see across our client base is there's no one answer for everyone. So everyone has to work it out. And I think we are now beginning to see people really start to figure out, okay, some of the unknowns are gone. I now have, at least now only have to deal with these ones and work out. Now, unfortunately, as somebody mentioned earlier, Brexit looks as if it's going to raise its ugly head again, and we are really going to have to start figuring out what that means. I also run the business financial planning grant activity within Enterprise Ireland, and we've seen a huge take-up of that. There's over 700 approvals at this stage. And I would say it because I run the product, but planning and trying to figure out what's going on, and no plan is perfect, but at least gives you a framework to try and start figuring out what are the known unknowns and what are the bits that you can deal with. So I think where we're at is we have a point in time now where companies really need to start focusing on what their future funding requirements looks like and how they're going to get that. And it doesn't all have to be loan, it could be equity or whatever, but to really engage and start planning for the end of the year.
Yeah, Donica, just to pick up on a couple of those points. I mean, firstly, over 700 companies been involved in the business planning grant. So that's business plans, cash flows, working through, doing some strategic work. Do you like? Are you? So that is a great product for people to avail of, and we're at the trenches in Grant Thornton working away with loads of companies and trying to help them do that. But I think what's very interesting, and your point there is an equity element to the SEF from the perspective of it's and there's a non-refundable element to it, and but for businesses as they're trying to assess and come out of this, they need to look at all aspects, equity, debt, and try and put a package together. And I think there's opportunities there.
And I think that's key. Like so the Sustaining Enterprise Fund, from our perspective, is probably the most flexible product we've ever had. And I've seen the cases coming through in front of our investment committee. They look at everything. They are trying to actively figure out how do we help companies. There is in July stimulus, when the 50% non-repayable bit up to 200k, I think is hugely attractive. So that's non-repayable element, and again, there's both equity elements and debt elements. And listen, we know we have 5,000 clients, and each one of them has a different funding requirement. So we know we're going to have to be flexible when we talk about what can be funded. We talk about funding not only just a business plan, but a project plan. So there's multiple headings that can be funded under that. We have a daily clinic that is run by our senior team and some of our investment team to try and just knock cases about and try and understand, is it something we can do? Is it something we can't do? Where are the other people happening? So there's huge flexibility in it. But again, just to reiterate, we need to start working on those now, because with the best will in the world, these cases will take time. And if we're to get what we want to do by the end of the year, we really need to be talking to those companies now.
And people need to be working on an action. Nick, I just want to pick up on a few of the points from the polls. And 25% of the people on the poll today said that they have received government support. But I thought it was interesting that 52% have said that they want to in the future. Now, maybe do you want to just give kind of your thoughts on applications on COVID-19 working capital on the funding to date? Like, there have been a lot, and there've been a lot of eligibility applications as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's very well borne out by our own research as well, because we surveyed the applicants for the COVID working capital scheme eligibility codes to see, what was the difference between people who had applied for eligibility and people who had gone on to apply and receive bank funding, and why there was a gap. And certainly we found that there was a cohort that had applied for bank funding that was still working through the application process, and that was partly again it was difficult to resolve a loan application, both in terms of businesses forward-looking insights as to where things were going and what the bank could then underwrite around that. But equally, there was a huge number of people who'd received eligibility and were planning on applying for supports but hadn't yet at that point. And I think it comes back to the huge challenge of trying to figure out where things are going, and then starting to plan and get on with the planning process to underpin that and work out what the approach is going to be, and therefore what finance is required, who to apply to, where to apply, and to get on with loan applications. So it's fantastic to see so many of the business planning grants go through, because hopefully that means that that's all happening right now. And it's really important that it does happen right now, because time is not on our side with some of these things. And the temporary aid framework, which is this massive window in the state aid rules that the European Commission has opened up, is time limited. It runs out at the end of this year. And we have worked really hard with all the different departments, with Enterprise Ireland and everybody, to bring supports forward as quickly as we can. Although it has been challenging in the context that we had an election and 100 days with no government in the middle of the whole thing. So we're there now. We have all the supports on the table. Everything's ready to go. But it's not guaranteed to still be there come January. And the other thing that's happening in January, as we know, is Brexit. So it's the time both to be working out how to get out from COVID, but also to make sure that you're not going to get sideswiped by whatever is going to happen with Brexit. And what we do know now about Brexit is that it'll be a hard Brexit. Even with a free trade agreement, it's not going to be a particularly soft Brexit. And without a trade agreement, that'll be very, very hard. So we do need to be thinking ahead in those terms and planning as well. So that time limit around the availability of certain supports. Now we do anticipate the Commission may extend the deadline for the application of the temporary aid framework into next year, but we have no visibility on that in terms of what they'll actually do. And it is not a comfortable place to be for a state aid organisation like the Commission, to be sitting there with a massive window in its state aid rules right now. They don't like that. It's not their natural state of affairs. So they will look to close it as soon as they possibly can. So I think it's really important to take the window now and get the applications in and get going on this stuff. We do have two types of process with SBCI Supports. We have the COVID working capital scheme and the future growth loan scheme with the higher unsecured levels of $500,000 each, and they're different term lengths and flexibilities around use cases. But they require eligibility applications through the SBCI first, which is a 48-hour process. We get the application in, we turn it around in 48 hours, and then you're into the loan application. With the COVID credit guarantee scheme, that doesn't exist. You just apply straight to the banks. So go straight to their websites, go to the CGS web page, and I'm sure Michael will talk about this in a minute for Bank of Ireland, and apply straight away. And the banks have been working incredibly hard over the summer to have that product ready and up and running, and have moved heaven and earth to make this happen. So hopefully that'll mean that the application process is as efficient as it possibly can be.
So the way, like just briefly on the credit guarantee scheme, there would be normal application process and credit criteria through the banks, but the loan will have an 80% guarantee from the state, which will encourage the banks to get the money out into the market.
All the schemes have 80% guarantees, but the one for the credit guarantee scheme is coming directly from the Minister, or from the Taoiseach in this case. So it is particularly powerful, and it's giving the banks the capital relief to be able to price the loans very well and very aggressively, and but also to, there's a real focus on this being the mass market solution for financing for businesses across Ireland, and to make that work.
Okay, thank you. And Donncha, could I ask, and I know from being at the coalface that businesses are finding it difficult to forecast in the uncertain market. Could you give some indication of what have been success stories for the SEF? Just the type of generally, without maybe going into specifics, but what are the ingredients for success and some of the other packages?
I think we always go, it's a warts and all approach. So if people are really going to lay their cards on the table and say, listen, this is where we're at, and these are the challenges that we see, we're well used to seeing this. I mean, we see it time and time again. To really think about, have you thought through what the options are? And we think that we've seen with the financial planning grant, which is designed to dovetail into the application for the SEF, that say some of the language schools who rely on overseas kids to come and study here, like they have just fallen off a cliff. And some of them just assumed they were out of business. But when you actually go in and work with them, and you can say, well, actually you have enough cash because your cash burn is actually quite low when you don't have people here to get you into the middle of next year. You might start taking some of those projects that you were thinking about, maybe turn them into an online version, that type of thing. It begins to allow people to consider different options for what they're seeing at a particular point in time. There are a bunch of other businesses that have actually had opportunities, so making personal protective equipment, or actually spinning their products slightly differently, or accelerating a move to online, or our online retail scheme. You talked about the second 5.5, but we had an initial one at the start of the summer of 6.5 million, which absolutely flew out the door. So there's a silver lining there, in that the digitization of the SME base has been accelerated by this, and the Taoiseach in supporting the new 5.5 million online retail scheme is really getting behind that. I think EI is here to work with companies. We are here to, I'm seeing that the level of cross-party work between ourselves, the banks, SBCI, is huge, and I think that's a great it's a great activity just to undertake, to go through that activity to help you work through what the options are for your business. We know that you can't forecast 3 years out. That's never going, you never could anyway. So in this particular environment, but at least let's put down on the table what are the bits that might get you, and we can try and start putting a risk against those as opposed to saying, I just can't do it. Because that's not an acceptable. We always need to plan. With COVID and Brexit, we need to even plan more, and our plans need to be live. Our plans need to be able to say, right, that didn't turn out like we thought it was going to turn out. Let's go look at the plan again and see what that means to us. So business planning as an active management tool, I think for me, I'm hoping is something that all of our clients come away from this.
Yeah, thanks, Donegal. That's really good. Maybe I might just ask you both for closing remarks. Nick, maybe could you just for SMEs in the audience, maybe a couple of pieces of comment or advice that you might give them, to close this panel discussion. Sorry, Nick, you're on mute there.
So I suppose just to reiterate what Donnacha's saying, the value is in planning more than the actual plan itself, because plans are redundant as soon as they're written. So it's to keep those very much as a live process. I think long and hard about the need for credit and getting access to credit so that you have the financing in place before you need it, and the process has begun when you're not got your back to the wall. Have a look at the SBCI.gov.au website for certainly the credit options that are available. Obviously complementary to what Gary's going to talk about with Microfinance Ireland as well. And think about it in terms of the duration of funding. How long is it going to be before you can be in a position to repay the loans? If it's a near-term working capital, look at the COVID working capital scheme. If it's a medium-term piece, look at the credit guarantee scheme. And if it's a long-term piece, look at the future growth loan scheme.
Okay, thank you. Donnacha, maybe just closing remarks.
Yeah, listen, I think really similar. This needs to happen now, I think is the key piece. We have what we have. The toolkit is there to be used. So let's start working our way through it. There is no point in delaying trying to figure out what to do next until there's nothing better coming along, and what we have might go away. Who knows, from a temporary edge state. So the time for action is now. And as I said, EI is going to be flexible and look at how we can do stuff as opposed to how we can't do stuff. And I think that's important to talk to your DA or talk to our business response team. So they're there and ready and willing to help at the moment.
Yeah. I think if you're not an EI client, the other thing is the local enterprise offices as well. Incredible support's happening through them. They're actively helping people start new businesses as well. And then lastly, there was a question on the Q&A about can you access support simultaneously from government agencies? Absolutely, we all operate in parallel. And there's no reason you can't, as Donnacha said, you can't have a sustaining enterprise fund investment right alongside an SBCI loan. So they all work together.
Well, thank you very much, Nick and Donnacha. Thanks very much for your time this morning. I'm going to move along now to our second panel discussion, and I'll ask Michael Lehoff from Bank of Ireland and Gareth Stokes from Microfinance Ireland to join me for discussion on the second panel discussion. Thank you. Good morning, Michael and Gareth. How are you keeping?
Great, Michael.
Good, Michael.
Good. Listen, maybe I might start with Michael. You might just maybe give us your observations on the market and how Bank of Ireland are seeing things at the moment.
Yeah, look, thanks, Michael, and thanks for the opportunity this morning. I'd say in terms of, look, what Nick made a comment in terms of some sectors are recovering, others are still stuck in the sand, and I think that's very much what we're seeing. But I think it's not even sectors as such. It depends on what part of the sector that you're operating in. So if we run down through maybe some of the high volume sectors, if you look at retail, convenience, your super values, your centres and that, they've had a very strong period over COVID-19 in terms of retail sales are up. But it very much depends on where you're based. So city centre stores are struggling because you don't have the population in the city centres on a daily basis. So that's had a negative impact, whereas neighbourhood stores have had a really positive boost to an extent in terms of from the impact. Likewise, looking in terms of pharmacies, the pharmacy side of things, from a medical perspective and prescriptions and drug sales has been really positive, and for businesses that are focused on that end of pharmacy sales have had a good period. But the beauty and personal care, which is a huge part of a number of pharmacies' sales, they're struggling because that's not obviously a priority in terms of spending at this point in time. Probably the highest profile one for discussion is really around hospitality. And again, very mixed pictures there. Obviously wet pubs, we all know the story there, not allowed to trade at this point in time. And that's going to involve, I think even as they do start to open, hopefully I think to see this morning, 21st of September is being muted. But it'll be a different environment and they'll need ongoing support, I think, as the position evolves. Restaurants, while they've been open, and I suppose saw early days in terms of how they reinvented themselves and moving into takeaway, and I think there was 600 new restaurants using Deliveroo as part of their distribution model. So some really good activity by owners there, which is positive. And then hotels. What we would have seen in terms of the July-August trading, regional hotels had really positive July-August because of staycation, but then your city centre hotels, which are dependent more on events and international tourism, are struggling. And also I think even when you look at the regional hotels, what a good July and August, given it was a staycation type business, well, what will happen now from this period on when that market will reduce. So I think that the stay and spend scheme will be interesting to see how that supports in that sector. Manufacturing, again, a lot depends in terms of where your manufacturing focus is, in terms of what your products are. But if you look at the PMI results for July and August, quite positive in terms of outlook. But when you get into the detail, you see that the inventories have reduced. So while the outlook and sentiment is positive, is the confidence there to manufacture and build up inventories? The PMI, I think, doesn't suggest it is. So I think that's a mix in terms of the impact that COVID has had, but also in terms of the one eye towards Brexit too, and what's coming down the track. The last one I might maybe touch on is on the motor side of things, which is I suppose a big ticket item for purchase that you would expect to be impacted significantly. And when you look at the high level stats from the motor market, particularly in terms of the 202 plate, you'd see that the sales in July were down 14% year on year and down just over 4% in August. But when you strip out car hire sales, which are a large part of the market too, you actually see that the market grew by 0.5% year on year. So there still is that bit of pent up demand, consumer confidence that's there. And what we would have seen in terms of particularly July and August as well is a large pickup in spending on debit cards and credit cards. So what I would say is it's a very much a mixed picture. I think though since the economy did start to reopen, the trading environment has been more positive than we would have expected. But I think concern looking down the road in terms of is there with a second wave the impact of that, but also with Brexit coming hard on our heels as well. That's the focus. So positive but concern.
Okay, thanks for that, Michael. Garrett, maybe you might just some opening remarks and your observations on the market.
It'll be very similar to Michael, but our client base are very much a subset of Michael's. We're dealing with micro enterprises at the very bottom end of the market. And while obviously people like our retail convenience stores have done well through the process, our tradespeople, so plumbers, electricians have done well. A lot of our high street businesses, our hardware stores, hairdressers, coffee shops are not seeing the footfall that they need to actually survive. So there's a lot of them currently who have reopened who are wondering, can they survive? A lot of haven't reopened because they're concerned that they're just wasting money in reopening, paying wages. So we're seeing this mix of people who are actually doing well, people who are actually doing quite badly, and it's not all about sectors. Obviously, there's sectors such as right across the hospitality area where they while they might have had a good month, they're very worried about what's going to happen over the course of the winter months. And I think the spike in the cases of COVID at the moment are really causing concerns to people, because most people thought we'd work through the summer, we'll get out the far side, and normality of some sort will revert, but people aren't seeing that. One thing that we've seen, which is very positive, during the summer months, we saw no requests for funding for startups, and that wasn't surprising. But since we've reopened our funds last week, our startup fund is actually getting quite a lot of interest from people who've maybe lost their job or have seen an opportunity, and they're willing to put their foot out in the market to see what's going on. So I think that's a positive. It's not all about COVID emergency funding.
Garrett, could I ask you maybe just to explain how your product works and how it is distributed into the market? And I mean, our own observations in Grant Thornton would be that the smaller end of business will be, have less reserves, will have less ability to deal with the kind of challenges that COVID brings, and are probably a high risk group. So you might just tell us how the product works and how you get it out into the market, please.
Yeah, we've a range of products, so we'll concentrate on the COVID product, but just so people who are listening in are aware, we offer normal loans, as we call them, for cash flow, expansion, and startup purposes. And those are available, as with our COVID loan, through any of our partners. So local enterprise offices, local development companies, the banks refer business to us, and they're all important partners for us. But the majority of people apply directly through us to come through our direct channel. So but we're happy to receive applications from our partners or directly. Specifically with our COVID product, which we just relaunched, I think it's a very positive product in the market. It's the loan size has been reduced to 25k, but that will cover off the vast bulk of the people who we're dealing with. We offer a 6-month interest and 6-month repayment free period. So for the first 6 months, there is no interest, there is no repayments, and the interest isn't accruing in the background, it is interest free. Your repayments commence in month 7, and in this phase of our funds, the government have introduced a very interesting interest rebate. If you make your repayments between month 7 and month 12, they will give you a rebate of the interest that you paid in those 6 months in month 13, and that money will be paid directly into your trading account. It's not a reduction off the loan, so it's a positive rebate to you. Our rates are 5.5% if you come to us directly, and 4.5% if you come to us through one of our partners. The one thing I need to say about the COVID fund, which is different to our normal funds, it is an emergency fund. It is for people negatively impacted by COVID. They have to be negatively impacted by a percentage of a minimum of 15% in terms of turnover or profitability. Unfortunately, that's not too hard a hurdle for anyone to hit, but it is important that COVID fund, which is cheaper than our other funds, is not for somebody trying to expand or using COVID. There is an opportunity coming out of COVID. Our normal funds be used for that.
Thanks, Garrett. That's great. Thank you for clarifying that. Michael, maybe could you just talk about maybe the last couple of quarters in Bank of Ireland and a lot of delay in capital amortization and a lot of support of businesses, and maybe you might just talk about that. That would have been a tough period in assessing businesses and how that is going to pan out into the future.
Yeah, I think, look, in terms of again, facilitated by I suppose it was facilitated by the EBA guidance, but in terms of, I recall back, I think it was Friday, it was the 6th of March, we had done our own press release in terms of looking for customers to come and talk to us in terms of flexibility around loan repayments and that. And within 2 weeks, we were into wholesale provision of payment breaks, so stopping payments on customers' loans. That was across the full product suite. That was consumers, mortgages, car loans, business loans, etc. So a really important step, I think, in terms of taking away what is a cash outflow from businesses, and letting people focus in on, initially, immediate was the focus on the health side of things, but also then in terms of what other steps they needed to take. And those payment breaks were one, I think, support put in place by the banks. Obviously, the other supports provided by government around the employment support schemes, etc., were all hugely important over that period. I think in terms of the initial applications, we would have seen there was a mix between absolute necessity and caution. And again, we would have said to the business, if you have any concern, take a payment break. It's available. There was no credit assessment, no credit checks. It was if a customer applied for it, they got it. And that gave people that window to maybe consider what some of those impacts were on their business over the next few months. On a positive side, I think in terms of, we've seen just over 50% of the business customers would have availed of a second 3 months. So as I say, in terms of that caution in day one, didn't transpire into the second 3 months. And I think that coupled also with was at the same time as the economy was starting to reopen. So it was good to see the 50% of businesses felt that they were in a position to go back onto full repayments. And we've seen those repayments stick, so that it's not a case of in terms of hopeful that they were in a position to do it. They've actually traded that way through it. So that has been, I suppose, a lot of the focus. It moves now, I suppose, in terms of what's the next phase. And I do think in terms of well, there may have been some noise about the supports in terms of even credit guarantee scheme being slow and coming to the market. I think timing is good. If you take businesses that were applying for a payment break in March, the first payment they wouldn't have made would have been in April. If you went for the 6 months, it's October when that kicks in too. So the timing is good now in terms of provide that additional liquidity support, because effectively that's what they say is in terms of whether it's a payment break or additional loans and liquidity support. So I think that's the next phase. In terms of the looking forward piece, and I think this is a really important feature in terms of the credit guarantee scheme too. And I think, Michael, you mentioned in terms of normal application scheme and application process and assessment, it's not the same. I think in terms of one of the core, there are loan eligibility requirements. So in terms of the amount you can borrow, so whether it's double your wage bill or 25% of your previous turnover. But the assessment will be in terms around were you viable pre-COVID-19. It really recognises that the future is very uncertain, but it's also really focusing on if a business would have sustained this level of debt back in January and February when you were looking at it, well then they should be given the opportunity to trade out of it and provide that additional liquidity there. I think for any business owner, it's important to look at there will be some businesses that were very viable back in January and February, and they know themselves that they're not going to be in a position to trade out. Taking on the additional debt doesn't help. It's just going to, I suppose, increase some of those challenges. But I think that the focus on being viable pre-COVID-19 is really important in terms of the credit guarantee scheme.
Okay, look, thank you for that. I think that clarifies that. That's really good. Garrett, I might just ask you for some closing comments then on some of the polls there mentioned that businesses mightn't be able to get credit approval. Maybe just some closing comments on that and observations for SMEs that are out there and what they should do.
Well, I would ask anybody who's looking for money to come and talk to us. We are very flexible. We do carry a credit risk that a normal commercial entity couldn't do. So we will look at cases that are quite vulnerable, but like Michael said, our criteria for the last 6 months and ongoing has been, were they sustainable before this crisis started? And then through our judgment, can they work through the process? And we've actually taken a sectoral approach to it. But our approval rates have been very high through phase 1 of COVID, much higher than our normal, which is probably counterintuitive, but that is the case because we've tried to be as supportive as possible. So if you believe you need money, come and talk to us. What we found through phase 1 of our fund is that people were actually very cautious, which was good. They weren't looking to maximise their borrowings. They were taking what they needed to survive. And we also found with our legacy book, a huge percentage of businesses, while they wanted a repayment holiday, they didn't want to borrow anymore, which is, I thought was very prudent. But I think as we move through the next phase, people really have to decide what they need to get their business going again. Do they need to re-engineer their business and think it through properly?
Oh, thanks very much. Thanks, Mike, Garrett. And Michael, maybe to comment on the polls that getting credit approval seem to be of most concern, but interestingly, 52% of people out there are saying that they want to avail of the government reliefs. But maybe just some closing comments on that and suggestions on what SMEs need to do out there.
Yeah, I think, and I think it's getting approval, 46% is what came up for that, but the provision of paperwork and providing info and records, when you add them together, that's the other 54%. And what I would suggest is look, we have spent a lot of time, and Nick referenced in terms of over the last number of months, working collectively in terms of the scheme and making sure that this is deployable at scale. and trying to minimize the level of administration that's associated with it too. So while there is some evidence required around eligibility, and I mentioned in terms of turnover or wage, the scheme has been designed in a way where it can be quite automated and make it easy for businesses. And I think that was a really important factor. It's easy to apply for. That's part of the reason that we'll be open for applications on Thursday, because some of the detail has only been finalised in the last week or so, and because we're trying to automate as much as possible, that's why we'll be available on Thursday. So I'd say that application process should be quite straightforward. And ultimately, and Nick again referenced it in terms of, we have a guarantee of 80% of the credit risk here from the state. That enables us to take a different view in terms of these businesses and to provide every opportunity to trade out of this. We're committed to making sure that any business that would have been viable for this debt pre-COVID-19 will get it, and will get it at pace. So I would ask, in terms of the key message to say, though, would be to engage early on it. While we'll be trying to deploy to pace, if demand is very significant, there will be a pipeline to work through there. But the other piece I just focus in on too, don't plan for the temporary aid framework to be extended. It isn't extended at the moment, and that 31st of December is an important date to make sure that that if there's support required, that it's in early and well in advance of that deadline too.
Thank you, Michael. I think that's been great. And Michael, thanks very much. And Gareth, thank you very much for your contribution this morning. I'm going to, just before I hand over to Gary from InterTrade, I'm just going to ask people to, if you have questions, please ask them on the Q&A session. After Gary, we will go through the questions that are out there. So please feel free to ask your questions, and the panelists are going to just remain for the remaining few minutes to go through those. So please ask your questions. I'll now hand over to Gary. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for that. So far, so good. Some really good information there, guys. Really appreciate it. As I say, good morning all. As I look out my kitchen window, I hope it's very dark morning. I hope it's a lot brighter wherever you are. I'm just going to take a very quick moment to run through InterTrade Ireland's staple suite of programs. And if Ashley, you could just roll forward to the next slide, please. Thank you. I'm just going to talk through this very, very briefly. As I say, my colleague Shane covered our COVID-19 supports, where we've introduced fairly quickly, and I know the teams at InterTrade are very active, but we still have, and we're still working with our staple 6 program areas, and we're as busy as always, even though we're not all in the office at one time. Now, you see at the top, I'm going to start at the top left-hand corner there, and you'll see our Brexit program. And I think Nick Ashmore, SBCI, set the scene very, very well in terms of Brexit. And you'll have all heard the announcements from the UK over the weekend. I don't tend to go into that and the politics of all of that, but the reality is, when we've been looking at COVID-19, Brexit's still been coming down the line. So what do we do in InterTrade Ireland? There's a €5,000 grant for consultants to work with your business to help a business get Brexit ready. Appreciate we don't have all the answers, but that support is there. And we find, particularly with companies in the south of Ireland, that they tend to, well, I don't have any customers in the UK, but they don't maybe consider their supply chain. So the main support there is that €5,000 grant to help get your business Brexit ready. Then we have our 2 cross-border sales programs, which have been running many, many years now, both Acumen and Elevate. Now, both of those programs operate. So if you're a company based, a manufacturing or a company with a tradable service based in the Republic of Ireland, and you want to sell your product into Northern Ireland, those 2 products are for you. And it works vice versa for a company based in Northern Ireland who want to sell their product from the north to south. So the first one, as I said, is the Acumen program. And if you're interested in that, InterTrade Ireland can part fund a full-time or part-time salesperson to work to sell your goods in Northern Ireland, and say it works vice versa as well, north-south. That's part funded. The sister program, the Elevate program, is the same idea. You're selling your goods into Northern Ireland. This time the Elevate program, it's 100% funded this time, not for a salesperson, but for a grant there for consultants to work with you, develop a sales plan, as I say, to sell your goods into Northern Ireland. And again, myself, that works north-south as well. So those are two staple trade programs, cross-border trade programs, Elevate and Acumen. And if you're interested in more detail on this, this is all available in terms of the minutiae of the criteria. Have a look on our website. In terms then of our what we do in terms of innovation, there are two main programs there which I'm going to highlight: Fusion and Challenge. Fusion program, if you have an innovation project within your business you want to take forward, then Fusion is for you. You can recruit a third level graduate through InterTradeIreland, and we will part pay their salary over a period of time to work with you. And there's been some great examples and great success stories. The other one there is the Challenge program. The Challenge program works, it's all about you developing new products and getting those quicker to market and cheaper to market. So those are our two main programs in terms of innovation, say Fusion and Challenge. Raise funding, and we're over to the right hand top corner of the slide here. That's the area that Shane and I are involved in. We've two advisory services. One which I'm going to talk about in a moment for our established SMEs, which is part of the program we're running this morning. But the other one, which we've been running for many years, is our equity advisory service. So if you're interested in taking on venture capital or business angel finance, you can meet with our resident venture capital professional, Mr. Trevor Sullivan. You can book an appointment online at the moment, of course, and get advice in terms of becoming an investor ready to take on angel or venture capital funding. We also run an annual venture capital conference. Look out for that coming in March next year, all being well. Online or physical, we're still not sure, but look out for that. We also, our CCORN competition, it will be relaunching in March. At the minute, it's a business plan marking stage. It's for early stage companies. Top prize there of €100,000. As I say, and it'll be relaunching. It's aimed, as I say, at early stage startup companies. And finally, in terms of that bit of work we do within Intertrade, my colleague Shane heads up the HBAN Halo Business Angel Network, the all-in network, which we do in partnership with Invest in Northern Ireland and with Enterprise Ireland. And that's for companies can approach at hban.org. If you're both angels and companies, it's very much a matching service to match companies with high net worth individuals who not just invest their money, but also their time in businesses. Tendering or go to tender programs. So very often we find over the years, SMEs tend to steer away from government tenders. Very complex, government EU law, lots of documentation and a lot of head scratching and everything else. So companies tend to avoid those. And at their peril, because they're very lucrative, government agencies, departments, local government are always in the market for goods and services. So there's no reason why SMEs can't avail of that. If you're interested, there are training courses there, and we find, at an event that we ran last year as part of this program, a company came out to me and said, we used to win no tenders, we won that program. Now we win 60% of the tenders. Can't promise you that, but that has been a very successful program. That's the Go to Tender program. I'm not going to go into the research and all that. If you the business intelligence stuff, if you're interested in some of the reports and things, InterTrade Ireland do, again, you by all means have a look at our website. So that's sort of all our programs in a sweep. I'll not go into any more detail. I want to leave time for question and answer. What I want to say, I digress. Sorry, on that area, I did mention I would talk about the advisory service. So as part of this, we offer 20 companies, part of this program, 20 companies a year, meeting or a series of meetings with Grant Thornton to look at the funding options available to them and progress maybe even to application stage. So there's an opportunity. You will get the slides from today, and with that you'll get a link. If you're interested in meeting with Grant Thornton, you have the choice now at the moment, whether it be online or socially distanced or physical meeting, you will get that link. And if you are interested, please apply early. There's 20 places for the year, and they do tend to eat up very quickly. But to say, you'll get that link either later with the slides later on this afternoon or tomorrow. Before I finish, on behalf of Shane and I and everyone at InterTrade Ireland, I just want to thank, first of all, everyone who logged on this morning. We had over 100 people, and I really appreciate you taking the time, because otherwise we'd be talking to ourselves. But in terms of just, I want to thank Amy and the team within Grant Thornton who helped put this morning together. Obviously Michael, who's been our host, Michael Neary at Grant Thornton. Emer Joyce, who came in at very, very short notice, and I appreciate that, and gave us, I thought, a very, very relevant and up-to-date presentation. Nick Ashmore within, our panelist, Nick Ashmore within SBCI. Now, Nick and the team within SBCI have been big supporters of this program for many years, and we really appreciate that. Donald Conlanan from Enterprise Ireland, sporting a new beard, by the way, since I last seen him. I didn't recognise him when I first seen him this morning, but looking very well. So thanks, Donegal. Michael LeHoff from Bank of Ireland. Again, Michael, thank you. And finally, Gareth Stokes from Microfinance Ireland. And thank you, Gareth. And great to see another Stokes on the agenda this morning. So look, thanks everybody for giving your time this morning. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm going to hand you back to Michael, who's going to host.
Thank you, Gary. And I see there's a question. There's actually a question that I think you're most suitable for before I let you go. It says, "Get Brexit ready. I applied for a voucher in February 19 and received it. However, I'm wondering if I can reapply for Brexit voucher again."
As far as I know, and I wouldn't be held on this, but as far as I know, yes, Michael. But if the person wants to contact me directly, as far as I know off the top of my head, yes, you are.
Okay, good. Okay, this is another question. We've got a good number of questions coming in here. So from everybody on the webinar, feel free to ask a question. We'll try and get through as many as we can. I'm assisting with a lot of credit applications over the last months. I'm getting strong impression from the pillar banks that the shutters are down on lending to tourism and hospitality centre. Is that the case? Maybe Michael, I might bring you in on that one, please.
Yeah, sure. No, I'd say absolutely not the case. I think we have done quite a bit of funding. Some of it supported through the COVID Working Capital Scheme, and I think we'll see more of it coming through on the Credit Guarantee Scheme. Yes, in terms of in some sectors, we do need to get a proper understanding. And what I would say is, I have seen applications coming through in for pub acquisitions. And we have a very limited appetite there at this point in time, just because the uncertainty around wet pubs going forward. On the other side, we've seen investments going into pubs, restaurants, and hotels in terms of their future business that are being supported. And I think in particular, we're probably seeing a number of hotels now coming forward, looking to use what they anticipate being a quieter number of months, to use that as an opportunity to do some refurb work and not have a knock-on impact to their business. So it is, look, in the hospitality sector, it's difficult at the moment to figure out what the future holds, but it is a short-term, hopefully short-term, short to medium-term impact. There will be recovery, and it's important that we provide the necessary support at the moment. So it's not a case of being shut down at all.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one for Gareth there, just in relation to microfinance loans. Is there still a personal guarantee on a microfinance loan? And there's also a comment that the local enterprise offices are overloaded. I don't know if you feel you could make a comment on that.
I'll start with the first one. There is no guarantee as such, but what we do have is, for limited company borrowings, we have an indemnity that needs to be signed by the directors. And to explain why we have that, under the legislation which we were allowed lend, we are only allowed lend to individuals. So to enable us, when we were set up 8 years ago to lend to limited companies, we had to introduce an indemnity by which the directors confirm that the debt is actually theirs. So it's a legislative issue rather than anything else, but yeah, the answer is right. It's an indemnity, not a guarantee. We don't look for security on our loans.
Okay, and then
the Leo offices, I imagine they are. I know they are. During phase one, our volumes were up 500%. I know theirs were similar. And not only do they have our product, they have a whole range of suite of products to sell. So I know they're very, very overworked at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Maybe I'll just move, maybe for Nick, are you eligible for further SBCI loans if you have already received a loan pre-COVID? And I think there's another one there. How long does the application take? So if you wouldn't mind just, and another one there, what are the typical rates for an SBCI loan?
Okay, thanks, Michael. Well, it does vary by scheme. So, but typical rates, I think almost all the rates at the moment are below 4.5%, but we're seeing rates now down in the kind of the 2.5% range as well. So depending on the scheme, depending on the bank as well, as because the banks are competing in how they use these schemes, so the pricing does differ, and it's a fair play to Michael, but it is worth having a look around and shopping around if you can. The application time frame is generally the piece that involves the SBCI around the two schemes where you need eligibility is very quick. Once you get the application in, we generally have it turned around in about 48 hours. And that's the standard we work to. And then it's really into the bank application. And that's really driven by the comprehensiveness and the quality of the information that's being put forward and being prepared by the business and their advisors as part of the bank application. I think Michael might want to comment on this as well, that the more comprehensive and the complete the bank application, the faster it is then able to be processed. One of the beauties of the schemes is that the loans are often unsecured, which means you don't have to then wait for the legal process of granting security and establishing security over the assets of the business. And that can also speed things up as well. But if the right information isn't there or isn't able to be there, that's the biggest challenge in terms of the lending process.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Nick, for that. Just Michael.
Sorry,
again.
just on multiple loan applications, yes, it is possible to have more than one SBCI loan. Generally, even within schemes where we say we have a limit in the new credit guarantee scheme of €1 million, that can be two loans of €500,000 each if you want. It doesn't have to be all in one loan.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Maybe Michael, just regarding even with the credit guarantee scheme, will banks be slow to underwrite if outlook is uncertain?
Look, in terms of the credit guarantee scheme, as I said earlier, it is about viability pre-COVID-19. So look, the scheme is designed, and better be careful how I put this, like businesses will get money that won't be able to repay it back. If we try to deploy this scheme on the basis that we believe there's certainty in terms of collecting the money, well, then the scheme won't do what it's intended to do, which is to give businesses that were viable pre-COVID-19 the opportunity to trade out of it. So we will, and look, the last question was around the hospitality or the pub area. If a pub looks for funding on this, that would have gotten the funding back in January, February, they will get the funding. And that's the absolute intention of the scheme and how it has to work. So the scheme has been designed to limit the forward-looking assessment and make it more focused on the rear-view mirror assessment to support businesses. And I think with the level of uncertainty going forward, that's an important feature of it.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I think that's Donncha. I think there's one there for Enterprise Ireland. Can you nominate your own consultant? And I guess this is relating to the business planning grant.
The short answer is yes. What we're seeing is we have 2 approved panels of consultants, and we have over 300 consultants approved at this stage. So what we're saying is you can use your own consultant, but that gives you the benefit of they probably know your business. They do have to be approved, so they go through an approval process for us to try and make sure that we're getting. This is a great opportunity, and we don't want to waste it. So we want to make sure that people are using people that are experts, that have the capability and capacity to actually do these plans. So we will do some vetting on the consultants. But what we're seeing actually is, as the reports come in, the quality varies, and the quality varies both by the consultant and by the company. And it's no surprise that the better plans that we're seeing and the more adaptable and flexible plans are from consultants that we know on our panels, because we're spending a lot of time, I know we spend a lot of time with Grant Thornton, working with them to explain our product set, to explain what we're trying to achieve. So on the one hand, you get the benefit of a consultant knowing your business, but on the flip side, they might know as much about the product. So the answer is you can, but I would argue that you should use one off the approved list.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So maybe a final question. I think we're coming to a close now. And maybe I think this one is for Nick again. If a business has repeatedly been declined for an SBCI loan over the last few years, is it likely to be any different now with the new launch schemes?
Well, look, I mean, I think the decline rate we've had at certainly eligibility level has been very, very low. So I'd be very interested if that is the case, that a business has been declined eligibility a number of times. But in terms of the actual applications to the banks, then if a business feels that they've applied and they've not been granted a loan and they don't agree with that assessment, there's both an internal appeal process within the bank itself where you appeal the result of the credit decision, but also the credit review office is there to help businesses look again at their loan application and to review it independently of the bank and to give a separate view. And there's a strong track record there of where a decision's been unfair, it gets overturned with the help of the credit review office. I think Michael's spoken very strongly around the new COVID credit guarantee scheme and the difference that represents. And certainly that's a different way of looking at borrowing applications, and certainly worth another look. But I'm happy to have to either look into or have some of my team look into any particular case. If my contact details are on the website or our info address is there. So if anyone wants to get in touch with us and they feel that their result of engaging with SBCI schemes has not been appropriate, then we're very happy to look into that and see if we can help get to the bottom of it.
Okay, thank you for that.
Michael, if I could just maybe briefly say on that too, though, I think in looking at any loan facility, you're looking at the amount and the purpose. And looking forward, I think in terms of depending on how much might be required and the purpose as in to trade out of COVID-19 could be very different to previous applications that would have been proposed under different SPCI schemes. So just because it wasn't approved in the past does not mean it wouldn't be suitable under the credit guarantee scheme.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. I think we're one question to finish, and maybe Gary or Shane from InterTrade might want to pick this one up. What supports are available for a brand new business startup based in Donegal?
Well, if it's a high potential startup, to take an Enterprise Ireland term, if that's the sort of thing, if you're interested in taking on venture capital, that aspect, certainly come and talk to us. We have the equity advice. We have our seed corn competition. We run business planning workshops and everything else. If it is the high potential end, certainly. But I'm not going to tell any lies either. If it's not a high potential startup, then it depends on the type of business, the type of sports. And for example, if they're interested to sell their goods into Northern Ireland, then those trade sports. So it very much depends on the business. I say in terms of where the business is based, as long as they're based on the island of Ireland, InterTradeIreland are there to help.
Thank you very much, Gary. Okay, look, just to finalise, just like thank everybody in the audience for taking the time this morning, and I hope you found it useful. To Shane and Gary from InterTrade, thank you for participating this morning. To the panelists, Nick Ashmore, Michael Lahoff, Donica, Cullinan, Gareth Stokes, thank you very much for taking the time this morning. I thought it was a really engaging panel discussion and very worthwhile for businesses out there. To my colleagues, Emer, Amy, Ashling and other contributors, thank you very much for making the webinar happen, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.